Scripture reading today is going to be from Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 39, and I'll be reading from the ESV. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and put out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man.
Good morning, church family. It's so good to see you today. I'm really, really glad that we get to be together. And I can tell you honestly and just entirely sincerely, it has been very good for me to be here this morning. And I hope it has for you too. Thank you, brothers, for leading us in prayer and reading the word to us and leading us in songs of worship. I just really appreciate you guys, and it has filled my soul. So thank you so much for that. We have several guests with us this morning, and we're glad that you've decided to join us today as well. We appreciate that we live in a place where we get to meet brothers and sisters from all over the place, because the mountain tends to bring a lot of tourists to this area, and we're just really grateful for that and glad that we get to spend this time with you today, and we hope that it's been a blessing for you on your trip while you're here visiting. I hope that everybody got a family report as you were coming in. That's our weekly bulletin. And on the back page of that, there is, as always, a place that you can take some notes along with this message. It'll coordinate to what's on the screens. If you didn't get one of those and you want one, you can raise a hand, and Ben, one of our deacons, is standing right back there. He'll make his way around to pass out a few of those. That's all we got. Just a couple of copies. Can we hand them out over here then? Ladies first, you know. So let's get them to these ladies on this side. And hopefully that will help us to put some ideas together with what we're going to talk about today. I want to do two housekeeping things, and I feel like they're both really important housekeeping things for us to talk about today. The first one is Megan Ella Brush welcomed little baby Holland into the world, as Rod said earlier, and so we are grateful for answered prayers. I'm going to assume that they're watching this morning, so we just want to tell you guys we're really excited for you. I know they're already home. Megan's exact words were, "I would rather be sleep deprived at home than sleep deprived at a hospital." So they are home. When they gave her that option, she went ahead and went. And as you can imagine, Sadie is super excited about having a little sister. So lots of good things that we have to be thankful to God for blessing us with and for blessing that family with. The other one that I want to remind you about is the area-wide song service this afternoon. Now, that's up at Smoky Hill up in Aurora, and I really want to encourage you, if you can spare the time and you are able to get yourself up there, to avail yourself of that really wonderful opportunity. We did this back on the very first Sunday of the year, which is a little risky with the weather in Colorado in the winter, but we pulled it off, and we're doing it again today. And last time there were nearly 250 saints from 5 different Front Range congregations. The place was packed, and I'm anticipating it will be even more so today, just because it's a little easier time of the year to get around between Colorado Springs and Denver and Longmont. So anyway, make your plans to be there if you can. It will be super encouraging, and hopefully a good opportunity for us to see some of our brothers and sisters from all up and down the state that we don't run across quite as often. So lots of good things going on with that. Okay, those are the housekeeping things that I wanted to tell you about. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in our world today and how that does and does not impact the kingdom of God. Today I want us to talk a little bit about Israel and about the conflict that has now been going on for a whole year on that side of the world. It was a year ago today, I believe. It's 6th or the 7th. I can't remember. It was the 7th, so a year ago tomorrow, whichever it is. It's been a year now since Hamas made their terrorist attack on the nation of Israel. And so we've now been watching in the news for a year. We have seen a year worth of fallout from all of that. We've seen the way that the nation of Israel has responded and has fought back and tried to defend their people, but also to, I'd say, go a little further than that and try to disarm some of the terrorists that are their neighbors in that part of the world. We've watched now for a year as the political unrest has really not settled, and it's become even more so kind of a forefront issue as we're very near a presidential election. So people are going to continue to talk about this part of foreign policy. And we've watched now a year of questions. People asking, is democracy ever going to work in the Middle East? Them being the only democratic nation in that area. Is it right the way that they've responded to the threats against them? And then is this still, and I think this is one of the questions that is unique to evangelical Christianity, we are watching this and we're wondering, is this still possibly a sign of the end of the world and things to come, that all of this is the beginning of what God is doing in setting up for Christ to come back and reign from Jerusalem? In all of that year, we talked about this a year ago, actually, from this pulpit on a Sunday morning. You can go back and find that on our website if you're curious. But in that year, the two things that I've heard come up the most among Christians have been the discussion of whether Israel's forces are right to have responded with the intensity that they have to all the threat and all the terrorism that they faced a year ago. And secondly, the question that I mentioned just a minute ago, is this a sign of the end of the world and of Christ's kingdom returning to Jerusalem? And I've heard those two questions discussed quite a bit among actually us that are in this room today and those watching online. I've heard those two things come up in various conversations and contexts whenever the news comes up. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this a little bit today and just revisit this idea. Number one, because I think I'm probably not the only one who's a little bit surprised that this is still going. Like when we talked about this 3 weeks into it last year in October, I expected that it would be over in about 3 weeks. And it's kind of like the way we all looked at COVID when they were like, we're canceling everything for like 2 weeks. And then 2 years later, we all figured life out, you know? It's kind of like that. I expected that this would be a lot smaller of an ordeal than it is. But now that it continues, and those two questions in particular continue to float in the way that Christians think, I just think it's worth us kind of addressing a little bit today what the Bible has to say to help us get a clear, God-given, true perspective on all of this stuff, okay? So that's what I'm after with today's message. So having said that, having watched the way that the nation of Israel, the nation themselves and the military powers and the government leaders have responded over the last couple of years, or now 1 year rather, it is interesting to me, and it's important to me to remember that this whole thing started with an unprovoked attack on civilians in a peacetime. And I really do think that that's a crucial thing to keep in mind, because I think for some of us, now that we've been living with this echoing in the news for about a year, it starts to become one of those deals where we go, well, yeah, of course they're fighting. They've been fighting forever. No, we got to get a little bit more specific. We need to keep a specific handle, I think, on the fact that this started as a terrorism attack on a population of innocents. And it became something a little bit more than that. It has become that today. But we need to remember where it started, I think, in trying to understand, is everybody or is anybody behaving rightly in this? I also just kind of want to ask and answer and at least reflect on the question a little bit. In the year that we have watched all of this unfold, has Israel responded in a way that seems to equal the retaliation that is deserved, or have they done more than what is right in this? And we talked a little bit about this last year, but there is a whole discussion to be had about a topic called just war theory. Those three words put together in that order. Just war theory. And that doesn't mean only war. It means war that is just, that is right, okay? When we talk about just war theory, what we're talking about is the way that Christians over the centuries have looked into the Word and have understood that there are certain ways of approaching conflict between people and between nations that are right and that are honestly just violent. And I got to tell you, I'm not sure how to apply it as I look at Israel's activities over the past year. I don't really know. Now, what I can say about that, and this is the comforting part of the gospel, is I don't have to know. I don't have to know whether I think one side has now become, what they were trying to prevent or what they were trying to put down, that they have become the problem that they were trying to stop. I know some Christians see it that way, and I can understand why. I know some Christians don't see it that way, and I can understand why. What I can tell you, though, and by the way, we did say that about a year ago. 3 weeks into this, we said, Israel is going to respond to this, and at some point we may be saying together that they have gone way overboard and done way more than they were supposed to. That's always been a possibility. But the thing about that I think is really interesting is the crucial reminder for Christians in all of time that our hope is not built on the things that happen in this world. Our hope does not come from the political activities of other nations. Our despair even does not get triggered by the political activities and the military actions of other nations, because our hope and our identity are firmly grounded in God Himself. We do not hope in the nations of this world. We hope in the God who rules over all the nations. There's a really interesting little nuance to Isaiah chapter 6. Everybody remembers Isaiah chapter 6 because it's the passage where God says, "Who will go for us?" And Isaiah has this wonderful line where he says, "Here am I, send me," right? It's Isaiah's really wonderful moment of triumph, and it's not like he ever falls from that. He's a good guy throughout the story. But here's what I think is even more interesting and more far-reaching as a truth for God's people from that chapter. In Isaiah chapter 6, it begins with these words. "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw Yahweh sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." Now, what's compelling about that is it's almost like Isaiah is telling people of all time, even though the throne may seem empty, somebody's still sitting on it, and it is God. The year that King Uzziah died, and the nation probably was thrown into turmoil because he was a good man, and you're not sure how it's going to go in the next generation of kings, I saw Yahweh still sitting on his throne. And brothers and sisters, I just have to tell you that kind of like we sang a minute ago, the kingdoms of earth pass away one by one, but the kingdom of heaven remains. And the king of that kingdom remains on his throne just as he did in Isaiah's time. And so this is one of the things, I think we look at the news and we go back over the course of this past year and we go, man, are they right? Are they wrong? Is this the way it's supposed to be handled? I mean, I know these people are enemies of their state. I know these people are enemies of the gospel because they're standing up for Muslim theology. Like, I know that there's a lot to consider in all of that. Can I just tell you that whatever our considerations are, when we get done with all of that, we better settle on this truth: that God is still on the throne and that our hope was never in the nations of this world. It is in the God who rules heaven and earth. And that's where our hope and our assurances are found. Now, that I hope helps us at the very least, not necessarily to answer the questions about just war theory and what we're seeing on the other side of the world, but at the very least to see through those questions to what is the more ultimate and powerful and important truth. That said, though, I want to spend a little bit more time on this question about whether any of this is the sign of the end of the world. How is it that God has approached Israel, and how is it that we should understand their role in world events even down to the present day? Let me do a little bit of biblical history for you, which won't surprise anybody, but I think it's important for us to move straight into the point for today. Let's do a little bit of history to prime where we're going with this. Let's make a couple of applications for ourselves and how we live and what we expect in this world. And then let's call it a day and go home and turn the world upside down. Okay? That's what we're going to do with the rest of our time. So here's the history lesson. First, when we talk about Israel, getting us to the Israel of today begins with the Israel of many, many centuries ago. And when you go back many centuries, all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, you find that God made promises to Abraham and to the descendants in particular of one of Abraham's grandsons, Jacob. Those promises are commonly known as the land promise, the seed promise, and the nation promise, that God would give all of these things and would make something great out of the true physical descendants of this man named Abraham, specifically from his grandson Jacob. And what's really interesting and what's really important for us to remember about that is that God fulfilled all of those promises that he made. Now you can see this in the reference right there from Joshua chapter 21. This is page 183 in our Pew Bibles. Joshua 21, verses 44 and 45, the last few sentences of that chapter. The Lord, actually, you know what? Let's read verse 43 as well. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Now, it's important to realize this is Joshua, and there's a lot more Old Testament to come after Joshua, and there are a lot more prophets that talk about what God will do for that nation, the nation of the Jewish people, in the future between Joshua and Jesus. But what's interesting about all of those prophecies is that when those prophets talked about Israel, they talked about how God would restore Israel back to this point where they were at now, where he had fulfilled all of his promises to them. So this really is a statement that echoes through the entire Old Testament, backward and forward, that says God did for them exactly what he promised that he would do for them. He fulfilled all of his promises. Now again, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Micah, different ones are promising that someday God would restore to them what they had given up by not being faithful to their God. But he fulfilled all of his promises to the nation, the physical people group who were descended from Jacob. Now, the rest of the Bible history that we need to remember is that through their long history as his people, they rejected his ways and eventually rejected the one he sent to save them. Now, this is what the prophets are really talking about in the time of Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah and Elijah and all those sorts of people. They're talking about the fact that you have gone so far astray from God that you don't really want him anymore. It's not that he's left you to your enemies because he's mean. It's that he's left you to your enemies because you have forsaken him. And you will continue to forsake him until the presence of his Messiah comes among you, and you will forsake him and reject him too. And that's exactly what they did. They have a long and, quite honestly, a very sadly steady history of failing to be faithful to God. And so it's not really much of a surprise that they are portrayed in the New Testament as a downfallen people. They are a people who have walked away from God, who have not continued to be faithful to him as they should. And Paul's going to explain in Romans chapter 9 through 11 how they had all the right opportunities to make that better, and they messed it up over and over again. And then God had a different plan about a different kingdom that he would move into their place in the timeline, right? But that's the thing that I think we need to realize here is that God did for them what he said he would do for them. He fulfilled all of his promises. They rejected him, and so for their unfaithfulness, he gave them up. Now it stinks to have to say it in those terms. It really does, because we would love to take any relationship between God and any people or any person and say, he will never give up on anybody. The clarification that needs is he will never give up on anybody who is trying to be faithful to him. The problem with Israel is they stopped trying. Over and over and over again, he reminds them as a whole nation to seek him and love him with their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And they won't do it. They reject him again and again and again and again. And of course, after having told God for so long, we don't want you, it makes perfect sense that he would say to them, I'm going to cut you loose too. It's not what we want. It's not what he wanted, but it's what became necessary. And the real end point of that in history shows up in the year 70 AD. Because it was in 70 AD, just outside of the Bible's timeline. We don't have any record of it happening in the Bible, but we know it clearly from history. It was in the year 70 AD that the Roman army marched against the city of Jerusalem and demolished it. The capital was completely demolished, razed to the ground. The walls were burned, the temple was burned, everything in the city was reduced to rubble. And at the same time, the records of their ancestry were also lost, probably in some big fire that took down some big library of scrolls somewhere in the city. But it's in that they lose their Jewish ancestry. They lose track of how my family tree goes straight back to Abraham and proves that I am one of God's chosen ones. They lost that. And it's in that same event then that really as a kingdom, as an identity, as a people group, as a nation, that their identity is destroyed. But I just need to reemphasize here that even when all of that happened, what we have in the Bible is a reminder that God never failed them. They failed him, but he never failed them because all of his promises to them had been fulfilled. Now, why does all of that matter? What's the point in saying that? It is to say that I know we live in a world where people still look to the nation of Israel as it stands as a political entity today, and they believe that we need to help preserve that little nation and its stand for democracy in the Middle East because God still needs to work with this people. He's still not finished with them. And I just have to tell you, brothers and sisters, I don't see that as being the way that God intended the story to play out. Now, as individuals, as individual people, does he want them to be saved? Yes. But as a nation, does he intend to restore them yet again and make them the nation that rules all the other nations? No. No, because what we have in the rest of the Bible is the telling that God has created a new Israel, that there is now a new group that belong to him, and it's those who are faithful to God through Jesus Christ. And we see this demonstrated in a couple of the different phrases that the various apostles use when they're writing the New Testament. Jesus himself said that many will come from east and west and sit at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's an act of fellowship there that will bring many people into the new kind of Israel, alongside those who were faithful to God in old Israel. In Galatians chapter 6, it's interesting, we would normally read that as the God of Israel. That's the phrase we're more used to seeing throughout the Old Testament, but here it is actually the phrase, the Israel of God. And what he's using that phrase to describe is a group of Christians, people who believe in Jesus. They are the Israel of today, the Israel who truly belong to God. And then Galatians again, probably because Paul is writing to a very Jewish-centric audience at this point in this letter, he calls them the sons of Abraham, and he says the way you have become sons of Abraham is not by being born to his lineage, it's by your faith in Jesus Christ. So the point in all of that is to say to us that we are Israel today. We are the real Israel today, the one that God has chosen as his own people. And it's not by a place that we live in. It's not by a king that is ruling over us in this world. It's not by a birthright because we have a certain genetic lineage that traces back to a certain person. It's by our faith in Jesus. Not that we were born into the kingdom that is God's, but that we were born again into the kingdom that is God's. And that's the point that I think we need to understand, because it helps us to deal with the entire perspective from the evangelical world that says Christ did not succeed in bringing about his kingdom, and we still need to work that out today. Now, I'm talking to an audience that probably like at least 90% of us, this is not the teaching that you were raised with, okay? But to the 10%, I want to be gracious here, and I want to tell you, I understand theoretical 10%. I should be clear about that too. But I understand that some of this may go against the grain of what you have been taught about the Bible and about Christ and about his second coming. I get that, and I want to offer it to you that I'm just going to go ahead and state the truth as I understand it from Scripture. But if you need to have more conversation and do some more wrestling with that, I'm open to that, and I'd like to help you, okay? Because I think this is one of those deals that this concept that I'm about to talk about here works its way into the way evangelicals think. Church-going people who profess to believe in Jesus. This concept works its way in some really deep ways. Now, for a certain segment of this audience, you are people who grew up hearing a lot of sermons about premillennialism. Okay, that's what I'm talking about right here. For a certain segment of this audience, you're like, that's a weird sounding word that I've never heard before. What does it mean? Let me not go too deep and too crazy on this, but basically what it comes down to is the belief that when Jesus came to this earth, and John chapter 1 says that he came to his own and his own did not receive him, that was a failure in God's plan. And so the belief is that when Jesus came, what he tried to do was make himself the king of the Jews, and he failed to pull it off. They killed him. And so God raised him from the dead because it was supposed to work, but he brought him back to heaven to wait until the time when it will work. And now he waits in heaven until we have cleared the land of Israel and made it safe for him to become king so that he can return to this earth and reign for 1,000 years before we all go to heaven. That's the simplest version of it. If you ever read the Left Behind series of books back in like the 90s and the early 2000s, that's what that was all about. Okay, it was all like it was all fiction set into that belief system. Okay, none of that, brothers and sisters, fits the Bible's explanation either of what Jesus did when he came, and especially of what Jesus will do when he comes again. None of that fits. It is a false belief that says that Christ failed at anything. He did not fail in fulfilling any of the promises that God intended. It was not a plan B that caused him to set up the church to hold things down until he comes again for his real kingdom. The church, brothers and sisters, is the real kingdom. And that has always been the plan. The truth is that the church was God's plan from the very beginning of time. Ephesians chapter 1 talks about this, that he put things in order for his church, his people, to be spread throughout all the world and to have the impact that we're supposed to have as the salt of the earth and the light of the world from the time before the foundation of the world. That's the way that he intended for this to go. And so we are part of a thing that God intended all the way through his entire plan, which I think is helpful for us to remember then. It's helpful for us to remember that his kingdom is already here. We're not still waiting for him to return and set up his kingdom. We are his kingdom. I almost went ahead and put this little message into our We Are theme series for this year, because this is really one of the essences of the idea, that we are the kingdom who belongs to God today. We're not waiting for him to come and be restored to his palace and his throne room in Jerusalem. We are bringing his reign and his influence into the hearts of every single human being. That's why he told his apostles to go and make disciples of every creature. Because the more hearts that belong to him, the more his kingdom spreads. His kingdom is his reign in the hearts of men, which is why so many Christians in so many different Bible classes, when we define the word kingdom, have said that it is the people, or that the kingdom refers to the church. Now, the Greek word, as I understand it from the New Testament, that means kingdom, and we usually translate it kingdom, it actually means power. Not the same thing as like electricity power, but the power to rule over a people. The word kingdom means the power to rule over a people. But by extension, it makes perfectly good sense to think of ourselves as his kingdom, the people who are ruled. We are the ones who are under that power. And so we're not waiting for anything so politically dramatic as him returning and setting up his throne in Jerusalem. What we're hoping for what we're working toward for his glory, is a time when everyone we know willingly gives their hearts to him, so that his power is what governs our lives. It doesn't have to set the speed limits and the economic policies of our country. It governs our very lives. And that will obviously at some point work its way out in what our countries look like. But it's interesting to me, and it's really important to me, that we have a firm grasp on the fact that we are not waiting for a kingdom with borders and currency and houses of government or anything like that to be established in Jerusalem by Jesus. We're working to push his kingdom forward and further into the world where we live today. That's who we are. We are his kingdom, and that's what we're supposed to do. And so let's just be reminded in very clear terms that his kingdom is not like the kingdoms of this world. And so if you have a belief system that is waiting for him to build a kingdom like this world, he's the one who said, that's not going to happen. He's the one who said, that's not going to happen. Because his forever throne is in heaven, and it is in our hearts. And so pretty much the same as any time that we talk about the end of time and we talk about what God has promised to do when he decides that this whole system of our daily lives has run its course, pretty much any time we talk about that, we make the same applications, and we need to, and here they are. Number one, I need to just ask every single one of us to think about the fact that about whether he rules truly in our hearts. Does he truly rule in my life? Is he the one who is in charge of all the decisions I make, the words I speak, the very thoughts I entertain? Have I given that over to be ruled by Christ as my king? And in doing that, am I ready for what is to come when this life is over? Whether it's the time when this life is over for me, or it's the time when this life is over for everybody. And Jesus is ready to reign as king over everyone who will bow before him. I want to take your attention before we're done this morning to Matthew chapter 25. Corey read from Matthew 24 a little while ago, and he read a section where I believe that Jesus transitions his topic. So he's been talking in the first part of chapter 24 about the time when the city of Jerusalem would be destroyed. It was still in their future, and that's what he was talking about there. But at verse 36 of 24, he pivots. And he says about a different day and hour that is still to come, which is the end of all things, nobody knows except for the Father. Nobody knows when that day is coming. And so he spends the next several paragraphs telling us how to be ready for the day that nobody knows is coming. So, starting in verse 36, he explains, nobody knows when this is going to come. And so, verse 45, he tells a little parable about a servant whose master left on a foreign journey, and while he was gone, the servant was just not knowing when his master would return, so he had to be faithful and do the right thing the whole time. Right? Keep going down a little bit further, starting in chapter 25, verse 1, he tells the parable of the 10 virgins, the 5 who were wise and were ready for however long it took for the bridegroom to come back and find them, and those who were foolish, who were not prepared for the long haul and were not there waiting when the man returned. Starting in verse 14, he tells another parable to basically explain the same concept. There was a master who gave to his servants and put some of his goods in their charge, and he was gone for an indeterminate amount of time, and when he came back, he found 2 of them doing what they were supposed to, but one of them had given up. One of them was unfaithful to him as their master. And so there's the whole interaction there where he reminds them, you need to be like the ones who were ready. Now that's what he's doing in all 3 of those parables, and all of that whole section right there. He tells them, be ready all the time, because you don't know when he's going to return. So be ready like he's going to return now. And I'd like to end our time today by reading from this chapter, starting in verse 31. Starting in verse 31 and just reading to the end. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Now, he does not say it will be in Jerusalem, but he will sit on his throne and rule over all people. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?" And he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Sometimes I think one of the most important things for us is to just read the text and let it speak. Let the Spirit speak to us and remind us of the truth. And this is it, brothers and sisters, that we are the Israel of today. And our job is to make sure that we are living as kingdom citizens today. Because if it is our time, whether individually or all of us at the same time, to go and to finally receive the full culmination of his kingdom, then we want to be ready for it. And of that day and hour, no one knows. And so let's make sure that that we are ready for it today, in case it is our time and he's ready to bring us all home to himself. I hope that reminds you of some of the things that are the most important. And especially as we look at these global events, I hope that it comforts us to know that really that's not what we're looking to know whether things are going to be okay or not. We're looking to God. We're looking to our true King who reigns in heaven and in our hearts to know whether things are going to be okay or not. And can I just tell you, it's all going to be okay. It's all going to work out the way that God intends it to work out. So let's keep our hearts faithful and completely devoted to him. So if there's somebody among us today that needs to commit your life to him, that you want to do what he says and respond because you believe in him as the Savior and as the King who will make it all work out in the end, then we'd love to give you an opportunity to do that. If you want to talk to me or to one of the shepherds about what steps you need to take, or if you're just at a point where you're going, okay, you know what? I know I need to be baptized in Jesus' name and just completely be ready for the judgment day today. Okay, then let's talk about that. And we would love to help you with that. If you want to talk to me or to one of the elders, why don't you come forward while the rest of us stand and sing this hymn together.